Right now, in this very room, some of you are going through the most transformative period of your life, and you don't even know it. You're feeling different, separate, maybe even outcasted. While everyone around you seems to have it all figured out, you're wondering why you feel so alone. But here's the life-changing truth that will forever change how you see your isolation. When you feel most disconnected from others, you're actually being connected to your highest purpose. As I look into your eyes today, I see that spark of recognition, because deep down, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That gut-wrenching moment when the whole world was moving in one direction, and every fiber of your being was pulling you in another. You see, isolation isn't a punishment, it's preparation. When God isolates the chosen ones, it isn't to break them, it's to make them unbreakable. Today, we're going to explore 7 sacred reasons for this divine isolation, and I promise you, by the time we complete this journey together, you'll never look at your moments of solitude the same way again. The first reason God isolates the chosen ones is to amplify their inner voice. In our modern world, we're constantly bombarded by noise, opinions, expectations, judgments, and endless chatter. But have you ever noticed how the most powerful truths come in whispers, not shouts? When you're separated from the crowd, something magical happens. You begin to hear the whispers. Think about the times when you felt most disconnected from others, yet strangely connected to something greater than yourself. Those moments weren't accidents. They were divine appointments. In that space of seeming emptiness, you were being filled with something far more precious than social validation. You were being filled with self-awareness. The second reason for divine isolation is the purification of purpose. When we're constantly surrounded by others, our dreams can become contaminated by their fears, their limiting beliefs, and their well-meaning but misguided advice. Isolation acts as a spiritual filtration system, clearing away the debris of other people's expectations until all that remains is the pure, crystalline clarity of your true calling. You see, every great spiritual teacher throughout history experienced periods of deep isolation. These weren't periods of punishment. They were periods of preparation. In these moments of solitude, their message wasn't diluted by popular opinion or corrupted by the need for approval. Their truth emerged pure, powerful, and undiluted. The third reason God isolates the chosen ones is to develop their spiritual immunity. Just as our physical immune system strengthens through exposure to challenges, our spiritual immune system strengthens through isolation. When you're alone, you're forced to develop internal resources that no external circumstance. Have you ever noticed how some people crumble at the slightest criticism while others remain unshaken by even the harshest judgment? The difference often lies in whether they've embraced or resisted their periods of isolation. Those who have learned to find strength in solitude develop an unshakable core that no external force can penetrate. This spiritual immunity isn't about becoming hard or cold. It's about becoming so deeply rooted in your truth that no storm can uproot you. It's about developing the kind of inner strength that doesn't need constant external validation to survive and thrive. The fourth reason for divine isolation is the activation of spiritual gifts. Many of us walk around with dormant abilities like seeds, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. Isolation provides the perfect environment for these latent gifts to emerge. When you're removed from the constant distractions of social interaction, you begin to notice subtle abilities you never knew you possessed. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Moments when your intuition suddenly became sharper, when your ability to understand others deepened, or when creative insights began flowing effortlessly. These weren't coincidences. They were the natural emergence of your spiritual gifts in the fertile soil of solitude. You see, divine gifts often require divine silence to be heard. In the quietness of isolation, you begin to notice the subtle promptings of your spirit, the gentle nudges of intuition, and the quiet voice of inner wisdom that usually gets drowned out by the noise of daily life. The fifth reason God isolates the chosen ones is to deepen their capacity for compassion. This might seem counterintuitive. How can being alone make us more connected to others? But true compassion isn't born from constant connection. It's born from understanding the depths of human experience including loneliness. When you've walked through the valley of isolation and emerged stronger, you develop a profound ability to recognize and relate to the pain in others. Your own experiences of feeling disconnected create a deep well of understanding from which you can draw to help others navigate their own periods of isolation. This is why some of the most deeply compassionate people you'll meet are those who have experienced profound isolation. They don't just sympathize with others' pain, they truly empathize because they've walked a similar path. The sixth reason for divine isolation is the development of unshakable faith. When you're surrounded by others, it's easy to lean on their faith to borrow their certainty when yours wavers. But in isolation, you're forced to develop your own relationship with the divine. You learn to trust, not just in good times, but in times of confusion and apparent abandonment. This is where real faith is born, not in the mountaintop experiences where everything is clear, but in the valleys where you can't see the path ahead. It's in these moments that you learn to trust not in what you can see, but in what you know deep in your soul to be true. And finally, the seventh reason God isolates the chosen ones is to prepare them for their unique mission. Every person who's ever made a significant impact on the world has gone through periods of isolation. These periods aren't just about personal growth. They're about preparation for service. You see, when you're being prepared for something extraordinary, ordinary preparation won't suffice. The depth of your impact will be directly proportional to the depth of your preparation, and some lessons can only be learned in solitude. Let me share something that will revolutionize how you view your moments of solitude. You see, that discomfort you feel when you're isolated, that's not a sign that something's wrong. It's evidence that something extraordinary is being made right. When God isolates the chosen ones, it's like a master jeweler preparing to transform a raw diamond. The cutting, the pressure, the isolation, it's all part of revealing your true brilliance. Think about this. Have you ever noticed how a seed must be buried in complete darkness before it can break through to the light? Your period of isolation isn't your burial. It's your planting season. And just like that seed, you're not being hidden, you're being positioned for growth that will astound even you. What I'm about to share with you goes against everything society has taught you about success and connection. We've been conditioned to believe that constant connectivity equals growth, that being in the loop is essential for success. But here's the liberating truth. Some loops are actually chains in disguise, and breaking free from them is your first step toward authentic power. When you're isolated, something miraculous begins to happen to your perception. It's like turning down the volume on a noisy radio. Suddenly, you can hear frequencies you never knew existed. Your intuition sharpens. Your inner knowing strengthens. The quiet whispers of your soul become clear instructions. You start to understand that what others call loneliness is actually sacred solitude. What they see as being left out is actually being set apart. This understanding doesn't come from books or lectures. It comes from embracing the divine purpose in your isolation. Let me tell you something that might shake you to your core. Your greatest breakthroughs often come disguised as your deepest isolation. When you feel most disconnected from the world, you're actually being connected to a power source that's far more reliable than any human relationship. This is where real transformation begins. In these moments of divine isolation, you're not just changing, you're being alchemized. Every lonely night, every missed invitation, every moment when you felt out of step with the crowd, these weren't random occurrences. They were carefully orchestrated opportunities for spiritual elevation. You see, there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. Loneliness is a state of lacking. Solitude is a state of becoming. When God isolates the chosen ones, He's not creating lack. He's creating space. Space for growth. Space for revelation. Space for transformation that couldn't occur in the noise and confusion of constant connection. Consider this. Every major shift in human consciousness, every breakthrough, every revolution of thought began with someone who was willing to stand alone. Someone who was either chosen for isolation or chose isolation because they understood its power. Your isolation is actually an invitation to develop spiritual muscles you didn't even know you had. Just as a physical muscle needs resistance to grow stronger, Your spiritual and emotional muscles need the resistance of solitude to develop their full potential. In these moments of isolation, you begin to discover parts of yourself that could never emerge in the constant company of others. It's like finally hearing your own voice after years of echoing others. This discovery isn't always comfortable. Truth rarely is at first, but it's necessary for the world tries to fill every moment with noise, every second with distraction, every space with activity. But true power, real transformation, comes in the spaces between, in the moments of sacred silence that isolation provides. These are the moments when you can finally hear your soul's deepest yearnings, understand your true purpose, and receive divine guidance with perfect clarity. This is why isolation often precedes innovation. It's why revelation follows separation. It's why the most powerful voices often emerge from the quietest places. Your isolation isn't a punishment, it's a promotion. It's not a demotion. It's preparation for elevation. When you truly understand this, everything changes. Those Friday nights alone become opportunities for divine connection. Those moments when you feel out of sync with others become times of perfect alignment with your purpose. The very experiences that once made you question your worth become evidence of your calling. You begin to realize that while others are networking, you're soul working. While they're building connections, you're building character. While they're gathering followers, you're gathering strength. This isn't about being better or worse. It's about being different because you're designed for a different purpose. In these moments of divine isolation, you're being taught a language that few understand, the language of authentic power. Not the kind of power that comes from position or popularity, but the kind that emerges from being deeply anchored in your truth. This is the kind of power that doesn't diminish others to elevate itself. It elevates others by simply being authentic. What you're experiencing isn't just isolation. It's sacred initiation. Every moment of feeling different, every instance of being misunderstood, every period of standing alone, these are all part of your spiritual initiation. The question isn't whether you're experiencing isolation. The question is what you're doing with it. Are you fighting it, or are you embracing it? Are you merely enduring it, or are you allowing it to transform you? Because here's the truth. The very isolation that feels like your greatest weakness today is being fashioned into your greatest strength for tomorrow. You know, what's fascinating about divine isolation? It's the only force powerful enough to strip away everything you're not, so you can finally become everything you're meant to be. Right now, some of you are going through this stripping away process. You're watching relationships dissolve. Opportunities seemingly pass you by and doors mysteriously close. And it hurts. Oh, how it hurts. But what if I told you that this pain isn't just random suffering, it's sacred surgery? When God isolates the chosen ones, he creates a holy operating room. In this space, divine surgery takes place, removing what's toxic, healing what's broken, and implanting what's needed for your next level. The isolation isn't just empty space. It's sterile space, protected space, holy space where deep healing can. Let me share something that might completely shift your perspective on your current situation. Have you noticed how a caterpillar must enter complete isolation in its cocoon before it can transform into a butterfly? That cocoon isn't just a hiding place. It's a transformation chamber. And right now, many of you are in your own divine cocoon. The problem is we've been taught to fear isolation. We see it as punishment rather than preparation. We view it as rejection rather than protection. But here's the truth that will set you free. Your isolation is actually insulation. It's insulating you from distractions that would derail your destiny. It's protecting you from connections that would contaminate your calling. Think about this. When a woman is giving birth, she's typically taken to a separate room. Not because she's being punished, but because bringing forth new life requires a protected space. Your isolation is your birthing room. Something new is being born in you. Through you, and isolation is creating the sacred space needed for this spiritual delivery. You see, there are certain types of growth that can only occur in isolation, just like certain plants can only grow in specific environments. There are aspects of your spiritual and personal development that require the unique environment of divine isolation. This is where your roots grow deeper, your character grows stronger, and your purpose grows clearer. When you're constantly surrounded by others, it's easy to mistake their thoughts for your thoughts, their dreams for your dreams, their calling for your calling. Isolation creates the space needed to differentiate your authentic voice from the echoes of others. It's in this space that you begin to recognize the unique frequency of your own soul. Some of you have been fighting your isolation, trying to break out of it like it's a prison. But what if it's not a prison at all? What if it's actually a fortress protecting you while you develop the strength needed for your next assignment? What if every unanswered text, every quiet weekend, every solo journey is actually part of your spiritual protection plan? Here's a truth that might shake you. Not everyone is meant to understand your journey. Not everyone is equipped to handle your process. Not everyone is prepared to witness your transformation. Your isolation is actually saving you from the well-meaning, but misguided influence of those who would unintentionally interfere with your development. When a scientist is developing something revolutionary, they need a controlled environment. Your isolation is your spiritual laboratory, a controlled environment where God can develop the unique gifts and abilities needed for your divine assignment. The very isolation that feels like abandonment is actually careful preparation. You're not just going through isolation, you're going through incubation. Every moment of solitude is pregnant with possibility. Every instance of being set apart is saturated with purpose. You're not being punished, you're being prepared. You're not being blocked, you're being built. Consider how a photographer needs a darkroom to develop their pictures. In that darkness, images emerge that were always there but needed specific conditions to become visible. Your isolation is your spiritual darkroom, where God is developing images of your future that could never emerge in the constant light of social connection. The intensity of your isolation often correlates with the importance of your assignment. The deeper the isolation, the more significant the preparation. The longer the solitude, the more crucial the mission. You're not being forgotten. You're being forged. You're not being overlooked. You're being overseen by divine wisdom that sees the end from the beginning. Some of you have been apologizing for your difference, trying to force yourself to fit in, attempting to override your divine isolation. But what if your difference is actually your divine design? What if your inability to fit in is actually your inability to fit into something smaller than your calling? In these moments of isolation, you're developing spiritual antibodies, the immunity to the opinions, judgments, and limitations that once held you captive. You're developing resistance to the social pressure that would have you conform rather than transform. This immunity isn't about becoming hard or cold. It's about becoming so deeply rooted in your truth that nothing can uproot. When you embrace your divine isolation, something miraculous begins to happen. The very solitude that once tortured you begins to nurture you. The silence that once terrified you begins to teach you. The separation that once wounded you begins to heal you. Because in this sacred space, you're not just alone. You're alone with God. This is where real power is developed, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not in the crowds, but in the quiet. Not in the connection, but in the solitude. This is where you develop the kind of strength that doesn't need constant validation, the kind of wisdom that doesn't need constant confirmation, the kind of peace that doesn't need constant company. Let me tell you something that might completely transform how you see your current season of life. That emptiness you feel, it's not empty at all. It's actually fullness in disguise. You see, before any vessel can be filled with something precious, it must first be emptied of everything else. Your divine isolation is creating space for something extraordinary to be poured into your life. Some of you have been asking, why me? Why am I the one who feels so different? So separate, so isolated, but that's like a diamond asking why it has to be cut differently than a brick. The very thing that makes you feel isolated, your difference is actually your divine design. You're not being isolated because something's wrong with you. You're being isolated because something's extraordinarily right about your purpose. In these moments of sacred solitude, you're developing something rare and precious, spiritual authenticity. Not the kind that comes from books or teachings, but the kind that emerges from direct encounter with divine truth. This authenticity can't be taught. It must be caught in moments of deep isolation, when there's nothing and no one to mirror except your true self. You see, there's a difference between isolation and divine isolation. Regular isolation depletes you, but divine isolation develops you. Regular isolation breaks you down, but divine isolation builds you up. Regular isolation leaves you weaker, but divine isolation makes you stronger. The key is recognizing which one you're experiencing and embracing the growth it offers. Some of you have been measuring your isolation by its duration, but that's like measuring the value of a masterpiece by how long it took to paint. The length of your isolation isn't a punishment. It's a reflection of the detail and precision going into your preparation. Every moment of solitude is a brushstroke in your divine portrait. When God isolates the chosen ones, He's not just changing their location. He's changing their perception. You begin to see things others miss, understand things others overlook, and grasp truths that others can't comprehend. This elevated perspective doesn't come from higher education. It comes from higher isolation. Think about this. Before a rocket can break free from Earth's gravity, it must first break free from all earthly connections. Those moments when you feel disconnected from everything familiar, that's your spiritual launch sequence. You're not falling behind. You're preparing for takeoff. Your isolation is actually an invitation to intimacy with divine wisdom. In these quiet moments, you're learning to distinguish between the voice of truth and the noise of opinion. You're developing spiritual discernment that can only come through sustained solitude. This isn't just about being alone. It's about being alone with purpose. And some of you have been fighting the silence, trying to fill every moment with noise, every space with activity. But what if the very silence you're fighting is actually fighting for you? What if it's creating space for revelations that can only be whispered, insights that can only come in stillness? In your isolation, then you're developing spiritual muscles that most people never have to use. You're learning to stand when there's no one to lean on, to believe when there's no one to validate you, to move forward when there's no one to guide you. These aren't just skills. They're supernatural strengths being developed for your divine assignment. Let me share something powerful with you. Your isolation isn't just about what's being removed from your life. It's about what's being refined in you. Like gold in a furnace, you're being purified. The heat of isolation is removing impurities that would have contaminated your calling, weakened your witness, and diluted your divine purpose. You see, there's a type of strength that can only be developed in solitude. It's not the strength that comes from competition or comparison. It's the strength that comes from completion. It's the strength of being so completely aligned with your purpose that you don't need constant affirmation from others. Some of you have been wondering if God has forgotten about you in your isolation. But that's like a masterpiece wondering if the artist has forgotten about it because it's still in the studio. You're not forgotten. You're being finished. Every stroke of isolation is intentional. Every moment of solitude is significant. Every instance of being set apart is sacred. Your isolation is actually your incubation. Just as an eagle's egg needs isolation to develop properly, your purpose needs protected space to fully form. The very walls that seem to be restricting you are actually protecting you, creating the perfect environment for your divine development. In these moments of sacred solitude, you're learning something precious. How to draw strength from your source rather than from your surroundings. This is the kind of strength that doesn't fluctuate with circumstances or fade with time. It's the strength that comes from being deeply rooted in divine purpose. What you're experiencing isn't just separation. It's sacred preparation. Every moment of feeling different, every instance of standing alone, every period of divine isolation is actually an investment in your future impact. The depth of your isolation often indicates the height of your calling. You're developing what I call spiritual stamina, the ability to maintain your peace even when everything around you is in pieces, the capacity to hold on to your joy even when there's no earthly reason to rejoice, the strength to keep moving forward even when you can't see the path ahead. What I'm about to share with you now might be the most important truth you'll hear about your season of isolation. Your isolation isn't just developing you, it's developing your discernment. You're learning to distinguish between divine connections and convenient connections between purposeful relationships and purposeless associations, between what feeds your soul and what feeds your fear. In this sacred solitude, you're developing something rare, spiritual sovereignty, the ability to stand in your truth without needing consensus, the strength to hold your peace without requiring approval, the power to move forward without needing permission. This isn't pride. It's divine confidence, born in the womb of holy isolation. Some of you have felt like you're missing out, like life is passing you by while you're in this season of separation. But that's like a sword feeling like it's missing out on being used while it's still being forged. Your isolation isn't causing you to miss life. It's preparing you to live it more fully, more purposefully, more powerfully than ever before. You see, there's a difference between being lonely and being chosen. Loneliness is a state of perceived lack, but being chosen is a state of divine purpose. When you understand that your isolation is actually your selection process, everything changes. The very experiences that once brought pain now bring perspective. Think about this. Before a tree can reach remarkable heights, it must first develop deep roots in isolation, hidden from view. Your season of isolation isn't burying you. It's rooting you. Every moment of solitude is another root going deeper, anchoring you more firmly in your divine purpose. Some of you have been asking, when will this end? When will I finally feel connected again? But that's like asking when the training will end before you've learned what you need to know. Your isolation isn't measured by time. It's measured by transformation. It's not about how long you've been alone. It's about how much you've grown alone. In these moments of divine separation, you're learning the language of the soul. Not the shallow small talk that fills empty spaces, but the deep inner knowing that guides chosen vessels. This language can't be learned in crowds. It can only be learned in the sacred silence of divine isolation. Your isolation is actually your elevation in disguise. Just as an elevator must close its doors before it can rise, some doors in your life must close before you can reach your next level. Those closed doors aren't rejection. Those misconnections aren't accidents. They're divine direction. Let me share something powerful with you. Your isolation is creating your insulation. You're being insulated from distractions that would delay you, connections that would derail you, and influences that would diminish you. What feels like rejection is actually divine protection, preparing you for a level of purpose that requires a different level of preparation. You're not just going through isolation, you're going through installation. Divine wisdom is installing capabilities in you that could never be developed in constant connection. You're receiving downloads of insight, uploads of understanding, and upgrades of wisdom that require spiritual solitude to process. Some of you have been fighting your difference, trying to blend in, attempting to be like everyone else. But that's like an eagle trying to swim with fish. You're fighting your very nature. Your difference isn't your dysfunction. It's your distinction. Your isolation isn't your identity. It's your preparation. In this sacred solitude, you're developing what few ever achieve, spiritual self-sufficiency. Not independence from divine guidance, but independence from human approval. Not separation from divine love, but separation from human validation. This is the kind of strength that sustains chosen vessels through their greatest challenges. Your isolation is actually your innovation period. Just as the greatest inventions often come from intense periods of focused solitude, your greatest contributions will emerge from this time of divine separation. You're not being removed from the action. You're being prepared for greater impact. This divine isolation is developing something precious in you, spiritual authenticity. Not the kind that comes from imitation, but the kind that comes from isolation. Not the kind that's learned from others, but the kind that's revealed in solitude. This authenticity will be your greatest gift to a world drowning in artificial connections. You see, there's a purpose in your position of isolation. You're being positioned for a purpose that requires precision. Like a surgeon being scrubbed before surgery, your isolation is your spiritual scrubbing, preparing you to handle holy assignments with clean hands and a pure heart. Some of you have felt abandoned in your isolation, but you're not abandoned. You're assigned. You're not forgotten. You're focused on. You're not rejected. You're selected. This divine isolation isn't your punishment. It's your promotion preparing to manifest. Your isolation is creating your insulation from distraction, your installation of wisdom, and your elevation to purpose. Every moment of solitude is sacred. Every instance of separation is significant. Every period of divine isolation is depositing something precious into your spiritual account. As we close, I want you to understand this, that your isolation isn't your conclusion. It's your preparation. It's not your prison. It's your cocoon. It's not your punishment. It's your promotion. Everything you're experiencing right now is preparing you for a purpose bigger than your pain, a calling greater than your comfort, and an impact more significant than your isolation. Remember this. When God isolates the chosen ones, it's never without purpose. Your isolation is your invitation to elevation. Your solitude is your preparation for service. Your separation is your preparation for significance. Embrace it. Trust it. Allow it to complete its perfect work in you. For when the student is ready, the assignment will appear, and you'll understand that every moment of isolation was perfectly preparing you for your divine moment of impact.